Imagine this, you're a 12-year-old boy living in a quiet Bulgarian village in the year 1550. The morning fog clings to the valley like a soft blanket as you help your father guide the sheep. The gentle clinking of the bells around their necks is the soundtrack you've heard every day of your life. Inside, your mother is preparing breakfast, warm bread and goat's milk that taste like comfort, like safety, like everything you've ever known. Then it comes, the pounding of hooves on cobblestones. Your father's face drains of color, pale as paper. Your mother drops the clay jug in her hands, and it smashes into pieces across the floor, just as your world is about to break apart. Everyone here knows what that sound means. The Sultan's collectors have arrived. From behind a wooden cart, you watch Ottoman officials swing down from their horses. Their silk garments are flawless despite their long ride. In their hands are scrolls and lists, and their eyes scan the gathered crowd with the cold precision of traders appraising cattle. One of them points at you. Your mother collapses to the ground, pleading in a language they don't care to understand. Your father says nothing. He knows that to resist would doom the entire family. You're pulled away with empty promises. That you will serve the Sultan, that you will achieve greatness, that this is an honor. But as the cart rattles away from everything you have ever known, all you can hear are your mother's sobs fading behind you. You will never see her again. This is how your new life begins. As a palace boy, a gum, in the most powerful empire on earth. And the cruelty you'll endure inside those palace walls will make you ache for the quiet days watching sheep in the misty hills of your homeland. Before we step deeper into these forgotten tales of survival and pain, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden corners of history, give this a like, subscribe for more stories, and share in the comments where you're listening from. I think it's remarkable that we're exploring these ancient histories together from so many corners of the world, bound by our shared curiosity. Your journey to Istanbul would be your first taste of a ruthless system. Cruelty quickly became the foundation of your new life. You and dozens of other boys were forced to march for weeks across harsh, unforgiving terrain, barely given enough food to keep going, sleeping either under the open sky or in flimsy shelters that did little to shield you from the wind and rain. Those who faltered, the ones who grew sick, lagged behind, or simply lost the will to go on, were abandoned to die where they fell. You learned your first truth about life in the Sultan's world before ever setting foot in the capital. Weakness meant death, and only those who were strong, cunning, or adaptable stood a chance of surviving. The boy beside you, maybe 14, had been taken from a small Greek fishing village. His name was Nikos, though he whispered that soon it would be stripped from him, forbidden to be spoken again. On the third night of the march, he tried to flee, but the guards caught him before he'd gone even a mile. They dragged him back into camp and beat him savagely in front of everyone. A deliberate warning. His screams carried across the fields, and you squeezed your eyes shut, desperate to block them out. But the lesson burned into you. Escape was not an option, and resistance would only bring ruin. By the time the great city drew near, you had learned how to survive. Move silently, speak only when addressed, fade into the background whenever a guard's gaze turned dangerous. You had seen boys vanish in the night, some caught trying to run, others simply unable to endure another day. The gaps they left in the line were constant reminders that your life hung by a thread. The first glimpse of Istanbul's skyline should have stolen your breath, the slender minarets slicing into the clouds, the vast dome of the Hagia Sophia, the sprawling palace complex glinting in the distance. But all you felt was a cold dread settling deep inside, heavy as stone. This beautiful city was no dream. It was the end of your old self and the beginning of something you feared to imagine. When you finally arrived, the first ordeal began, the selection. Ottoman officials sorted the surviving boys into groups based on what they thought you might become. The inspection was degrading and methodical. They pried open your mouth to check your teeth as though you were livestock, tested your reflexes, and made you recite whatever scraps of reading and arithmetic you knew. They measured your height, examined your skin for marks or imperfections, and studied your face with the detached scrutiny of art dealers judging a sculpture. The sharpest minds and most striking faces were sent to the palace school, the Enderun. Others would be funneled into the ranks of the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite soldiers. But for those bound for palace service, a different ordeal awaited. One that would challenge not only the limits of your body, but the resilience of your very spirit against relentless dehumanization. You were counted among the lucky ones chosen for the Enderun school, housed deep within the walls of Topkapi Palace. The officials who made that decision noted your unblemished skin, your alert eyes, and your quick mind, and they smiled. At the time, you mistook that smile for approval. You didn't yet understand it was the satisfied grin of predators who had found prey worth keeping. The Enderun has been described as the world's first formal academy for gifted youth. While technically true, such a title hides the harsher truth of what education meant for boys torn from their homes. Yes, you would be taught languages: Arabic, Persian, Turkish. You would study mathematics, astronomy, literature, and law. You would be drilled in music, calligraphy, and skilled crafts. But every lesson came at a cost far greater than academic strain. The palace that became your entire world was a labyrinth of marble corridors, lavish chambers, and concealed passageways where unseen dangers seemed to wait at every turn. You were placed in dormitories deep within the palace walls, cut off from the outside world by layers of stone, guards, and rituals that made the thought of escape not just impossible, but inconceivable. The dormitory assigned to you stretched out like a marble crypt, row after row of narrow beds draped in silk sheets that felt less like comfort and more like shackles against your skin. That first night, you lay awake, absorbing the sounds that would come to define your captivity. The muffled sobs of boys aching for home, burying their cries into pillows. The hushed conversations in tongues you couldn't yet understand. The slow, deliberate footsteps of older pupils and overseers drifting down the corridors long after darkness fell. In your hands, you held tight to the small wooden cross your mother had slipped to you in those final moments before you were taken. But by the next morning, even that last link to your old life was found and taken from you. From that day forward, you were given a new name, Mesmet, and ordered to erase any trace of your Christian past. Conversion to the Empire's official faith was not negotiable. It was the cornerstone of reshaping you from a stolen child into a servant of the Sultan. The ritual itself was conducted with ceremony and grandeur, as though this had been your choice all along. But you knew, and everyone knew, that choice played no part in it. You spoke the words they instructed you to say, while deep inside you clung to the sound of your mother's lullabies and the stories your father once told by the fire. The most dangerous part of your schooling wasn't the language drills, the lessons, or even the physical discipline. It was the calculated dismantling of your own will, piece by piece, and your reconstruction into a tool for imperial power and pleasure. Inside the palace, life was governed by a layered hierarchy where advancement required far more than academic excellence. Success depended on satisfying the whims of your superiors, and satisfaction could take forms no child should ever have to understand. Your first glimpse of the palace's unspoken rules came through Amit, an older boy who had survived here for 3 years. One evening, he sat on the edge of your bed without asking. "You're new," he said, his voice a mix of warning and opportunity. "You don't yet know how things work here. I can protect you, teach you, help you move up. The instructors trust me, and they listen when I speak about the younger boys." His hand came to rest on your shoulder, and you felt your body turn rigid. You were 12, and no stranger had ever touched you before. Yet something in his demeanor made your whole body tense. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You'll have to show your appreciation," he said. "There are certain ways boys like you can repay older ones for their protection. Ways that stay between us." It was the kind of decision thousands of boys before you had been forced to make: refuse and face vicious punishment, isolation, and the loss of any chance to rise through the ranks. Or accept and give up the final fragile remnants of your childhood innocence to a system that treated your body as a bargaining chip, a commodity exchanged for protection and privilege. There was no real choice here, only the instinct to endure. The palace's sexual hierarchy was intricate and predatory, governed by rules shaped over centuries of exploitation. Eunuchs castrated when they were boys themselves, and often carrying deep psychological wounds, eunuchs held significant authority, and many used it to prey on the endless flow of new captives. They knew every turn of the machinery because they had once been its victims, yet instead of shielding the vulnerable, many became its most devoted enforcers. Older boys targeted the younger, sustaining cycles of abuse that stretched unbroken through generations. It was hazing warped into something far more sinister, a rite in which the initiated secured their rank by inflicting the same cruelties they had endured. Palace officials, secure in their power, freely sought out the most attractive boys, knowing they would never face consequences. Their victims had nowhere to turn, no authority to appeal to, no hope of justice. What made the system especially insidious was how seamlessly it was woven into the palace's official hierarchy. These relationships were not shameful secrets. They were a sanctioned part of the social order, embedded so deeply into daily life that they appeared natural, inevitable. A boy who caught the favor of an influential patron could see his career advance rapidly. His studies eased, his life softened with privileges. Those who defied or displeased their superiors were pushed to the bottom, left with only the most menial and degrading tasks forced into harsher punishments or erased from the palace records entirely. The psychological toll on boys like you was immense, and by design. Cut off from your family, stripped of your name, and immersed in a world where your body was treated as a form of currency, you developed what we might now call complex trauma responses. Some boys adapted by becoming shrewd and manipulative, learning to weaponize their sexuality as a means of climbing the ranks and staying safe. Others retreated inward, existing as empty shells who performed their duties without feeling, while their inner selves quietly withered away. You saw both patterns unfold around you. Dmitri, taken from a village not far from yours, learned quickly to smile and charm the older boys and instructors. Within 6 months, he had finer clothes, richer food, and a private tutor for his language lessons. But his eyes were lifeless, and he no longer spoke of the family or home he had once missed so fiercely. When newcomers arrived, he studied them with the same assessing gaze the officials had once used on him. Stefanos, a fisherman's son from Greece, chose the opposite course. He rejected every advance, endured the resulting beatings and punishments, and slowly faded into something ghost-like. He went through the motions, completing his chores, studying just enough to pass, but spoke little, his presence a quiet act of resistance but without spark or interest, as if a little more of him faded each day. Then, one morning, his bed was empty. No explanation was given, and no one ever spoke his name again. You tried to walk a narrow line, accepting certain advances to ensure your survival, yet guarding some private corner of yourself that remained untouched. But the palace was built to crush such balance. Every day brought fresh trials, new decisions between humiliation and ruin, and more subtle ways in which the system tried to reshape you into its own reflection. From time to time, European visitors to the Ottoman court caught faint glimpses of this hidden world, though their reports were colored by personal prejudice and limited knowledge. In the 16th century, a Venetian ambassador remarked on the excessive fondness high-ranking officials seemed to show toward their young male attendants, describing scenes that deeply unsettled him. He wrote of boys no older than 10 or 11, clothed in silks and glittering jewels, serving older men with an intimacy that hinted at relationships far beyond what was proper between master and servant. A French diplomat in the 17th century was less restrained in his account of a palace reception, noting that the young pages moved through the halls like beautiful birds in gilded cages, their eyes cast downward, their bodies dressed as if for exhibition. It was impossible not to notice the possessive way certain officials looked at these children, or the flicker of fear that passed through a boy's eyes when his master drew near. The physical realities of palace life deepened the psychological torment, each aspect crafted to strip away resistance and foster total dependence. You lived in packed dormitories with almost no privacy, every moment under constant watch. Before sunrise, you were woken for prayers in a faith you had been forced to adopt. Meals were sufficient but never generous, served at fixed hours, and your days were dictated by an inflexible schedule that left no room for reflection, let alone defiance. Punishments were frequent and often devised to humiliate as well as harm. Speaking your native tongue, clinging to old customs, or showing anything less than enthusiasm for your new life could mean public beatings, ritual shaming, or solitary confinement in a space so small you could barely lie flat. You once saw Milos, caught praying in the manner of his old religion, stripped naked and made to stand in the courtyard for an entire day while others were encouraged to jeer at him. The message was unmistakable. Your former identity was not only forbidden, it was something to be despised. The palace's internal economy added another layer to this machinery of control. Small privileges could be earned: better food, finer clothes, a softer bed, access to books or music, through academic success, obedient behavior, or by pleasing your superiors in ways that went far beyond duty. In a life so restricted, these rewards became treasures, binding boys into a network of favors and dependencies where resistance seemed hopeless and collaboration appeared the only way to survive. You learned to navigate this system with the calculating precision of someone far older. Helping senior students with their studies might earn you their protection from unwanted advances. Excelling in certain lessons could draw the attention of teachers who might shield you from the worst abuses. Performing your role with perfect obedience and outward enthusiasm could win you small freedoms that felt immense within your confined world. Some boys still tried to escape, But the palace's position on a narrow peninsula surrounded by water made success nearly impossible. Those who were caught faced punishments meant to terrify everyone else. You saw one boy return after attempting to swim across the Golden Horn. His body broken, barely clinging to life when they hauled him back. The beating he endured in front of every boy left him permanently crippled. From that day on, he was a living cautionary tale. Broken, barely able to function, a constant reminder of what happened to those who chose defiance over obedience. The rare few who managed to slip away faced an even harsher reality. Years inside the palace had erased so much of their former selves that returning home was often impossible. Families might no longer recognize them, and even if they did, the community could reject them as traitors or as converts to a foreign faith. Most had no useful skills outside palace life, making survival on the outside precarious. Many escapees were caught within days. Those who remained free often drifted through a world that no longer had a place for them. As you grew older within the system, staying alive through a mix of quick thinking, adaptability, and carefully measured submission, new challenges emerged, along with deeper compromises to your spirit. The most accomplished students might one day earn positions in the empire's highest offices, but that success carried a terrible price. To keep their status, they had to uphold the very machinery that had once broken them. It became impossible to ignore the truth. Your teachers, your overseers, even the most powerful officials in the palace had once been boys like you. Taken from their homes, stripped of their identities, and reshaped into tools of imperial authority. And that realization brought its own grim choice. Resist the system and be crushed by it, or embrace it completely and become one of its architects. Selecting new boys, dismantling their sense of self, rebuilding them in the empire's image, and enforcing the palace's tangled web of power and exploitation. Many chose the second path, finding it far easier to transform into predators than to remain prey. The final rite of passage, the chikma, marked the close of your palace schooling and your induction into the machinery of imperial service. After years of carefully packaged cruelty disguised as education, you emerged fluent in several languages, polished in administration and diplomacy, versed in science and the arts. Yet alongside these accomplishments, you carried something far darker. A soul shaped by calculated corruption, an understanding of authority inextricably tied to exploitation, and a fractured ability to form healthy human bonds, wounds that might never close. For many, this so-called graduation was less a liberation than a transfer from one system of exploitation to another. Those placed in administrative posts entered a world where political gain and sexual barter were still intertwined, where the palace's lessons about dominance, submission, and survival continued to govern adult life. Those sent into military service bore the same psychological scars, often becoming either ruthless enforcers of the empire's will or hollow men adrift, searching for meaning in lives rooted in abuse. The Ottoman elite's stance on these realities was calculated, acknowledging just enough to control the narrative, while preserving the structure that sustained their power. Official regulations nominally forbade certain abuses, but in practice, authorities ignored anything that served their goals. The palace school produced efficient administrators and fiercely loyal servants. The human toll was dismissed as inconsequential. Any outsider's criticism could be brushed aside as a failure to appreciate the empire's refined system of training and advancement. Some Ottoman chroniclers hinted at the system's shadows, even as they defended it. One 16th-century court historian wrote, "It is true the palace school demands heavy sacrifices, and not all emerge unchanged. Yet from this crucible of discipline come the empire's finest servants, men of proven loyalty and perfected skill." Such rhetoric of refinement and transformation concealed the harsher truth. Your testing was institutionalized sexual violation, your discipline was the erasure of your true self, and your education came at the expense of your innocence and your capacity for an untainted life. What makes the palace system most chilling is how seamlessly it braided genuine intellectual training with the systematic breaking and remolding of the human spirit. Opportunity and abuse were woven together so tightly in the palace that it was impossible to separate the benefits from the brutality. By the standards of your age, the education you received was exceptional: literacy in multiple languages, mastery of sciences and mathematics at the forefront of their era, training in diplomacy, administration, and strategy that could open doors anywhere in the known world. But these achievements were never freestanding virtues. They were fused to the harm that shaped you. The same hands that broadened your mind also violated your body. The same institution that promised advancement stripped you of innocence. Every step forward was stained by the means used to make it possible. The system laid bare the tangled knots of power, sexuality, and violence that underpinned much of the pre-modern world. The Ottomans were far from alone in exploiting the young. Echoes of such practices existed from antiquity through the Middle Ages. Yet there stood out for its scale, its deliberate structure, and its seamless integration into the machinery of empire. It was no secret vice, but an open, celebrated institution, defended fiercely by those it served. By the 17th and 18th centuries, shifting warfare and bureaucratic reforms eroded the palace's central role. European influence and changing moral climates further reshaped it. But these transformations arrived too late for the thousands who had already passed through its gates at the height of its power. For them, the palace meant childhood erased, innocence dismantled, and spirits broken in the name of imperial glory. Some boys emerged into positions of staggering influence: viziers, generals, governors, steering the destiny of the empire itself. Yet they carried invisible scars, and many repeated the very abuses that had formed them. Others faded from the record entirely, remembered only in ledgers noting their intake, their training, and their final assignment, their private suffering erased from history. The palace still stands today, its marble and mosaics drawing tourists who marvel at its elegance. Visitors walk through the same chambers where beauty and brutality once coexisted, yet they are shown only the splendor. The guided tours speak of educational brilliance and imperial achievement. They do not tell of the punishments that broke boys' wills, the suicides, or the lives bent out of shape in service to the state. And so the ghosts remain, the boys whose names were never written in anything but rosters, whose stories dissolved into the silence of the archives. They walk those polished corridors still, silent witnesses to the truth that behind every empire's glittering facade lies a foundation built, in part, on stolen youth and unspoken grief. If you want, I can now merge all the rewritten parts into a seamless, continuous narrative so it reads like one polished piece without the seams from our edits. That way it will feel like a single, flowing account from start to finish. A foundation built on human suffering, the price of power was extracted from those who had no say in paying it. The true horror lay not in the violence alone, but in its methodical application, its seamless normalization, and its quiet erasure from memory. You and thousands like you lived and died within a system that saw you not as human beings, but as beautiful objects to be shaped, displayed, and consumed. Your story, and theirs, must not survive only as an exotic footnote in imperial history, but as testimony to human endurance in the face of calculated cruelty. The morning air that once carried your anxious footsteps has long since dissipated, but the echo of your life still travels through time, demanding witness. To remember you is to remember the staggering price of the empire's golden age. In recalling your story, we acknowledge not only your own suffering, but the suffering of every child caught in the machinery of power, used, discarded, and forgotten by systems that prize conquest over compassion and empire over innocence. If you want, I can now take all of the sections you've given me so far and weave them into one continuous, fully edited historical narrative so it reads as a complete, polished piece without breaks. That way it would feel like a single flowing account from beginning to end.